This video tutorial goes through how to create plan and sectional line drawings from a 3D scan. We'll begin with how to start to work with this 3D scan once you've imported it in, and this video follows on from my previous video on how to create these 3D scans and then how to import them into Rhino. Once you've imported it in, it is likely that the scale of these objects won't be quite right to the actual scale that they were on site. So it's important we begin by rescaling these to match their accurate scale. Obviously in Rhino we work at a 1:1 scale, so we need to make sure the size of this object, and this is the tree in the kind of case of this particular model, we need to make sure that this matches its accurate size in the real world. Now to do this, I actually measured the height of one part of this tree, and I know the height of this particular branch here is about 1.1 meters. So I'm going to use that as a reference to help rescale my model. Something I usually do when trying to scale my model is basically just to draw out a box within the model, look at the height of the box in relation to this particular piece. So if I make this, it's about 2.2 meters there, which makes me know that this is about double the size that it needs to be, so I'm going to scale it by a half. You could also exactly measure a point on the site to kind of give you this height, or have a datum point on the site that you can locate back to as well, but I'm just going to use this method for now. So now I know that the model is about double the size it needs to be. I'm just going to use the Scale 3D tool, scale it from the center, and we'll do it by a 0.5 scale factor to half the size of this particular model, as you can see there. And now we can test again using my box tool to check the height of this piece. Now you'll notice when you use the box tool on a mesh like this, it can be very slow. The reason for that is that this mesh is very, very dense, and so it's trying to snap onto all the tiny little points on the mesh, and because there's so many of them, it might take a long time to do this in your model. So that's something to bear in mind with these 3D scans, is that they're very dense meshes, so they may be quite slow to work with at times, but we'll go through sort of ways around this in this video as well. So now you can see that this height is about 1.1 meters there, just looking at my bottom figure here. So we know that that's about correct to the right size. So now we've got our scaled up model to work with. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a section through this model which we're going to turn into a line drawing here. So the way I'm going to do this is we'll start by creating a clipping plane just by typing in clipping plane here, and we'll draw it out flat. And what this would do is it will essentially just clip our model. Now depending on where it's made, your model might disappear, and that's just because it's clipped the whole model away. It's essentially hiding it. So if we select that and just move it upwards until you get to a point where the model is then visible again. There we go. So now you can see where our plane is. So you can see as I move it up and down, it will clip and section our model in that way. So this is nice for a plan cut, but let's start by doing a section with this particular model. So I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees just by holding the shift key and spinning on the gimbal piece here, and we'll move it over to a location. And I'm actually going to turn it around the other way, so we've got it facing this way just by rotating it. And I'm going to move it to about this location here. So we're getting a nice kind of cut through our tree, looking at these trunks there. So we've got a nice kind of section line there. Now what you would probably usually do if you were doing a section of a model that was made in Rhino is you might then do a make 2D of this particular piece. Now with these really dense meshes, I would advise against doing make 2Ds of these. The reason for this is if I switch to a ghosted view or a shaded view here, you'll be able to see how many individual faces this mesh is made up of. If we zoom in, you can see all these tiny little diamond fragments, triangles here, that make this mesh. So if we do a make 2D, you're just going to get thousands and thousands of these tiny lines building up the surface, and actually the kind of tidy up work required with this is longer than it would be if you just started to redraw some of the pieces yourself. So I'd recommend against using make 2Ds with these particular meshes because of that reason, that really intense sort of tidy up work you get with them. What you can do, however, is we can still cut our section line from this, and we can get that as a nice piece of line work to use as the base of this drawing. So to do that, let's go back to rendered so we can clearly see our view. And we're going to just type in section up here, we're going to select the objects for the section, which is my mesh. So I'm just going to select my mesh like so, and then hit enter. And then it says start of section, in which case I'm just going to choose the bottom of my clipping plane, and end of section, and I'm just going to choose the other side, or just hold down the shift key and choose a kind of point along from there. And what that would do is it will then just cut a section line through the model, and you can kind of see it there. It might be hidden, so what we'll do is we'll just hit escape to get out of that tool, and that section line will be selected, and if we move it, we then get our line here. So there we have a nice section line cut through that model. Now, in order to get the other branches which are in elevation, kind of in the background of this section, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to take a capture of our rendered section. I'll just move this over there for now. And then we're going to start to trace around these pieces to draw those in just by hand, using Rhino's drawing tools to draw in those extra elements. So instead of using a Make 2D, we're going to use this rendered piece essentially as a template to trace over to create those other parts of the section. So how we're going to do that is we'll go to the right view, we'll locate our object like so, and then I'm just going to kind of frame it centrally in the frame. We'll drop down on our right view, go to capture to file, once you've got it set, and hit OK there, and we're just going to save that in here like so. So all I've done there is I've just captured that particular view, and I'll just bring it up on screen like so. So this is just an image now which we can now import in and use as a template to draw out our pieces. So what I can now do is we're going to go back, we'll go to our top view now. I'm going to locate that picture, which is just in my downloads. We'll just drag and drop it on as a picture file, draw it out in the scene like so, rotate it into place, move it to align with my section I've made. So, and you might find it's a bit small, in which case we'll need to scale it up. So just use the scale 2D function here. We'll pick a common point on the object, and I'll pick another point to scale it from, and then we're just going to click and drag and snap it to match that line. And you might want to kind of play around until you get it exactly right. You can see mine slightly off there, but I think for the time being that should be fine for this. And once you've created and lined those two pieces up, then all we need to do is essentially just trace around the other elements in this image to start to create the background of our section. And usually for that, I'll kind of keep the section work on one line, go on the elevation line. For this, I'll probably use my curve tool, and we'll just start to draw out these pieces here. And I'm going to skip forward to what that looks like once you've started to trace around those objects. So here you can see I've finished tracing those now, and I'm going to move the background image out the way so we can get a sense of what the object looks like on this piece. So I've now finished tracing those elements out, and I'm going to move away the background image so we can have a look at what that drawing looks like. And there you can see, once you've started to trace them out, I've also started to bring in a little bit more detail using the green line, and it's really up to you how much you draw in. You might want to draw in some of the extra bits of detail on here and really take time to kind of finesse that drawing as well. So you have flexibility, and it might be that you want to then combine the drawing and the render to create a sort of more rendered section. But for now I'm just going to keep it as my line drawing, and you see I've dropped my lines on these different section weights here. So once we do that, we can then set up a new sheet. So maybe I want to set up a sort of drawing sheet for this. I'm going to just set up, let's do an A3 page like this. We'll find our section. We may need to rotate our view, and to do that we can just double click within our layout view, go to camera, rotation, and I'm just going to set this to 90 to flip that round. And let's do this to a correct scale as well, so we can do it at 1:20 maybe on here, and we can frame this in our view. And because we've sort of set particular line weights on that already in my layers, and I've got kind of print width set to this, I can type in print display, turn it on, there. See, now those line weights are turned on, we've got a nice sort of fixed section line there and thinner lines for surroundings, and we can start to draw in more detail to that as well. But you can see, because we're using this 3D scan, we're getting this level of detail that you wouldn't normally be able to get from just drawing or kind of trying to estimate this. It's actually an accurate level of detail for this model, and we've got a nice kind of groundscape as well. So it starts to build in a lot of complexity and detail into your drawings using this method. To create a plan drawing from our 3D scan, we're going to create a clipping plane in the horizontal motion like this, and then I'm just going to move it down into place until I find a good location where I want my objects to be cut, and I think probably somewhere like there will work well for this particular part. So once we've got that in, we now want to create a section, much like we did with our section line. Now if I create a section in the perspective view, it will only cut it in the sort of vertical plane like a section would be cut. Now we want to cut this horizontally like a plan cut, so in order to do that I'm going to move out of the perspective view, we're going to go into the right view, and then in this view we'll then select the model and just type in section there. Now we're going to just pick a point on the left hand side, matching my clipping plane. I usually try and snap it to the clipping plane I have, and then we'll drag over to the right and draw our section line horizontally across the model. Once you can see the line in place like this, we're then going to drag it, hold the shift key to lock that horizontally, and then left click to finish the section line. And once it's done, you'll see it goes yellow, and we know now that the section's drawn. And I'm just going to hit escape when that's done. Now that's been cut, we're going to go back to our perspective view. In our perspective view, we can then turn off our clipping plane just by selecting it, going to the properties and turning off the perspective. And then I'm going to find my cut line just by selecting the model, like so. I can deselect our clipping plane there, and I'm just going to move it out of frame here, like so. So there our cut line for our particular trunks of the tree that we're cutting through. Now obviously, to get the background elements like we did with the section, I'm going to create two rendered views to see that. So we're just going to turn the clipping plane back on so we can see where it's being cut and the objects below, and I'm also going to turn it on in the top view there. Now if we go back to our top view like so, make sure it's on a rendered mode, we're going to just get a good view of this element, and much like we did with our section cut, we're then going to go to capture, to file, and we're just going to save this out like so, and we'll call this one like so. Once I've done that, I'm actually also going to reverse my clipping plane so we can see the objects above the cut line as well, because I'm going to want to draw in these elements to give a sense of what's happening above my plan, and it's quite useful to have both sides of the clipping plane to allow flexibility to draw these parts in. To do this, all we need to do is select the clipping plane, go to our properties and hit flip direction, and you'll see that's flipped around and we can now see the top of these trees. And then without moving the view, I'm just going to go to top again, down to capture, and we're going to capture this to file as well, and we'll call this top 02. Like so we have those two parts of the view. Now once I've captured both of those, we're going to go onto a shaded view for now. I'm now going to turn off my clipping plane in both the perspective and the top view, so we can just see our cut pieces and nothing's being clipped. And then let's find those two screenshots and we'll bring them in. So it's top one, we'll just draw it out, and I'm not going to worry about the scale just yet, we'll do that in a second. And then top two, now we'll draw this one in as well, like so. And I've just drawn them in one on top of the other to make sure that they come in at the same size. Because I've matched the view for these should automatically line up now. So if we stack them in like that, I can make sure that they'll line up. Now what's happened is they've come in actually at a 90-degree angle to my view, so I'm just going to rotate these around so they match. And now I need to line up my cut line with this drawing. So what we'll do is I think we'll move the view underneath the cut line there, and I'm going to try and sort of just snap it to the big piece here. So we'll kind of line up the ones we can see, And then making sure I've got both selected, we're then going to go scale 2D again, and just scale this accordingly to match the plan. And as before, you can take a bit of time to get this exact. Sometimes it's easier if you sort of scale it from a point on one side, scale it from here in relation to a point quite far away here, and so the accuracy lines up, and there you can see my lines are now in place. So now we've lined those up, much like the section, I just need to draw out these pieces in elevation to give my plan a bit more sense of depth and to show those extra objects in. So I'm going to pause the video and just trace around those elements here. A good thing to make sure when you start tracing out from an image like this is to make sure that all your objects you're tracing on align flat to what's called the C-plane in Rhino, which is essentially your level at a datum point of 0 in the Rhino model. To do that, we could just select the objects here. I'm going to just go to the perspective view so I can see them, put this on shaded, and then I'm just going to select the move tool, lock it in the vertical plane, select any part of the object, and just type in the coordinates 0, 0, 0. And what that will mean is it will try and align the object to those datum points, and because we're locked in the vertical plane, it will just bring it down so the objects align to 0 there. So they're now on that 0 plane. And what that means is when you're drawing in top view, it will automatically draw all lines to stick to that base level, that datum level of 0. So it means you won't get any lines moving up and down vertically while you're trying to draw on a flat plane. So now we can begin to draw out these elevation pieces, and I'm just going to use the curve tool to do this, to start to draw out some of the details on this model, like so. And I'll pause the video and trace around these, and then we'll have a look at the results. So now you can see I've drawn in the main parts of these tree trunks, and if we just move away the reference image, you can see I've got my section line on this red line, so a slightly thicker line. Purple, we've got the main body of the tree, and then I'm starting to draw in some detailed lines in this blue elevation fin part here. And what I'm going to start to do is we're going to start to also draw in some of the landscape parts. So I'll make a new layer for this. We'll just call this landscape, and this may be an even thinner line for this part, and we'll do this in an orange so we can see. And I'm just going to use the scan here as a way of kind of picking up on some elements that are green, which might have a different landscape feature, to some that are brown, which are the leaves and the mud. And we can just start to trace around some of these kind of landscape features that are happening here, just picking up on the kind of elements that the scan is giving us. Essentially, we're using the scan to give us that high level of detail and then trying to transpose that onto our drawing. So now you can see, as I've finished tracing around those, that I've just tried to identify the areas of kind of grass from the areas of mud and where the areas of leaves have connected, and I've just drawn them out with this orange line here. So we're starting to kind of identify each of those territories, and I'm going to give this probably a dotted line weight so it doesn't get confused with the more solid parts of the drawing there as well. Now to finish this drawing, what I want to do is start to draw on these top elements of the tree that I've rendered out here, and we'll draw this in a dotted line so we can see what's happening above my plan. Now to do this, all I'm going to do is we're going to just draw a line on the edge of this so I can line up my bottom piece. We'll move this one out of the way, and we'll just bring our bottom layer, move it up and snap it to that line, so now we know they line up like so. Then let's make a new layer. We'll call this above. We'll make this a brand new colour. Let's do this in kind of light blue so we can see it. Make sure we're drawing in that layer, and then we're going to start to draw in the above pieces as well. So same again, we're just going to use the curve through points tool, and I'm just going to start to draw out these. And you might want to turn off the other layers when you do this if they're getting in the way, so we can just focus on these pieces here like so. So what I'll do is I'll pause the video again and I'll just draw around these. So now we've finished drawing out our above line there, so what I'm going to do is let's just move out the way this image too, and we'll turn on all our layers so we can get a sense of all of these different drawing layers on here. So now we have those pieces drawn, and I've got my line weight set up for these as well. What then do is just make a new page for these. We'll just find this piece of drawing here. And as you can see with my line weights, we've now got our dotted line for our tree above. We've got our thick line for where the tree is being cut. We can see the kind of branches, and then we've got this dashed line to just give a sense of the outline of the terrain. And you could start to add in hatches into this as well to start to kind of draw more into this plan. We could add in labels to start to detail some of the textures. You might want to go in and add more to the texture of this piece as well. But that essentially is the kind of base level of this plan drawing that we can start to draw into. So that was just a quick tutorial to go through how to draw out plans and sections from a 3D scan such as this and turn them into line drawings. So thank you for watching.